Hello and welcome to We Are the Deluge. We are your co-hosts, Emily Crandall and John McMahon, two guards sitting in the watchtower, or are we? This is a spoiler-free chapter-by-chapter podcast about the climate change novel The Deluge by Stephen Markley. Today we're discussing Shane, Rise of the Panopticon, set in 2028, the second chapter from Shane's point of view, which we are presenting in the form of a little manifesto.
Okay, yours was definitely better than any of the things I had written down, but for some reason I could not shake the operative. Like, the reason he's caught is because he stored the device in his own backpack that he bought at the university bookstore. So I was trying to make that into a thing, but it just wasn't clicking. Yeah.
It can pair well with like the enrollment cliff that the University of Kansas is facing / I am facing in my professional life.
I mean, aren't we all?
Yeah.
This chapter, wow.
One of my favorites of the entire novel.
So shall we begin with our declarations?
Please declaim for us.
Okay. Shane drives through downpours and dust storms, switching cars and avoiding cameras, from clandestine to mundane. And which fate is worse, disappearance or extinction?
Oh my God, that's incredible. I shouldn't even share mine, but I guess I'll go with Shane diagnoses the panoptic power of the surveillance state and surveillance capitalism, the plots and methods of 6 degrees, and her own loneliness and dread, all the while the panoptic text boxes diagnose the rest of the world of the novel.
That's good. I don't know. We'll talk about the text boxes, I'm sure, but I find it hard to incorporate them into my summaries. They're like, they always pose sort of like thorny problems for me in figuring out what is actually happening here, but we shall discuss.
Yes. Where would you like to start us off, Emily?
Okay. So a very pervasive theme in this chapter is the weather. At the beginning, Shane has been driving from New Hampshire, and she's been driving for a couple days in a downpour. I forget exactly where she is when we pick her up.
Yeah.
But she's en route to Kansas, where she arrives on the tail end of a dust storm.
Yes.
That I'm guessing looks like the movie, what's it called? 2012.
I never saw it.
I just remember the memes from when there were fires in New York or in Canada, and the sky in New York was orange.
Mm-hmm.
And the dust storm has maybe wiped out some towns in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Sort of like unclear. Oklahoma City is maybe like gone or under a layer of dust so thick that its services are, I don't know, unavailable, inaccessible.
I think this is one of the fun things about the way Markley is writing this, because there's, I think, some slippage between people left this town because they didn't have access to water over the preceding years. And in this moment of crisis, people are fleeing these towns.
Yeah.
And I think those slip into one another.
It's also just, we are recording while Hurricane Milton is ongoing in the wake of Hurricane Helene, like having watched all the videos. I mean, I'm just like full on disaster porn consumption mode right now. Like, the towns in North Carolina just like gone underwater, wiped away. And then I read this chapter and I was like, holy fuck. Okay. Other things that get woven into the weather are discussions of what is it? Where I forgot to write down where the Civil War was, but I think it's somewhere in North Africa, right?
In North Africa. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, the Sahel Civil War. So it's that belt that runs right from the Red Sea to the Atlantic that like is sort of above the Sahara, but below the like northern desert regions.
Yeah.
And there's a civil war happening there. And Shane describes it as, in large part, the devastation or the horror, right? She's listening to some NPR show. So it's like first the dust storm, then the Civil War. And the problem with the Civil War is there's no water. So like the militaries, when they arrive on a source, just like immediately drain it. And so like it's war, but it's also water. And this is like paired with the dust storm and the downpour.
Well, and it's also the dead bird that like falls in front of Shane at the front of the chapter in front of her car. She's walking to it after stopping for snacks, which she then I mean, it's like, it's so over the head that I kind of
Mm-hmm.
love it. Ultimately, it's like just as excessive, right? Because the bird, she puts it in a little box. She knows it's going to die, but she's going to transport it to her friend who is very good with animals, her comrade who is very good with animals, and who knows a lot about birds. And of course, it like dies well before she even makes it to him or where she's going to be meeting up with him. So it's like, okay, we're talking about mass extinction, obviously, but also just the heavy handedness of, well, this bird's going to die, but I'm just going to try to do whatever I can anyway to like find a shoebox and put it in there and try to rescue it, even though I know it's not going to work. Is just
Mm-hmm.
so overt symbolism about what the fuck they're trying to do and the way they're talking about what they're trying to do in 6 degrees. It's
Yeah.
just, it's classic. But it's great. It's great.
Right. Like
I
I
can't
can't
complain.
go to the vet because I can't be picked up on the cameras or put
Hmm.
into the system or attached to any device that's networked, right?
Hmm.
But I'm going to take the slow route
Yeah.
to death. Just
keep that in mind for later in the episode. The
yeah.
slowness question.
I that is in my notes as well. Yeah, I think this is interesting. Like weather, we've been pointing out weather in other chapters, but I feel like this is the first one where the drama, maybe aside from the Keeper chapter in the Blizzard,
Yeah,
where like the drama of the chapter is, I mean, I feel like I'm about to use a bunch of mixed metaphors. Like on the one hand, the drama is sort of like heightened by the weather, but also the drama is the weather
yes,
at the same time. And so you can't separate out, right? Like Shane's isolation, her exhaustion, her fear, her stress from like literally being inundated with, on the one hand, downpours and on the other hand, dust storms. And it's like, I don't, this is going to be a very dumb and cheesy analogy, but everyone's like, oh, Sex in the City is so great because New York City is a character, right? It's like the weather is both a character, like, and the plot and the tension and the
yeah.
affect. I don't know.
Ooh, I have to give shouts to a student of mine,
Hmm.
Nick L. I don't know if I can use their last names, but Nick L. who wrote an essay about the deluge on what kind of character is the weather. Like that was the topic of the essay, and it was very good.
That's incredible.
Hmm.
Um,
But like from like a formal, this student is a theater major, but from like a kind of formal examination of what kind of character it was really good.
Man, I would love to read that. Maybe we can get permission.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Was there anything that sort of stood out to you about the weather here?
I'll point out just kind of one line that I thought was, again, like Mark Lee not being subtle, but to great effect. And this is the bottom of 201 onto 202, where Shane is driving towards the dust storm. She's driving back home, although how much of a home it is, I'm sure we'll get into. And she talks about, she knew the color was the result of the grains in these galaxies of dust performing with the dissipating sunlight. It gave the air texture. And then here's the key line, the fibrous atmosphere on the approach to Hades. It's the classic literary thing to do is like, let's make our ancient Greek mythology reference, but to do
Hmm.
so with the multiple things that weather is and weather does, as you've been pointing out, like makes it so that what could have been cliche is actually just a like effective literary.
Yeah, and it has depth, right? In that sense, it's not just hell. it's a
Right.
it's a specific
Hades
hell.
is better than hell, right?
Hmm.
Because I mean, like if I think about Hades, my go-to reference is like Socrates is like, cool, kill me, I'll go to Hades and converse with like Odysseus and everybody
Yeah,
in the
and learn
afterlife
something more
about
about
all
the
the
nature
stuff
of death.
I've been pestering you about for,
Yeah,
for, for 70 years.
but there is a sort of like, I guess, almost a futility in that, like even
Yes.
with Socrates, right?
Yep.
Like if it is the case that going to Hades is actually how we get at all the things that we've been curious
Mm.
about and working our whole lives to figure out, then like why didn't we just go to Hades in the first place?
Hmm. But I think the characters are struggling with that and
Yeah.
struggling with the possible pointlessness of, and there's an argument to be made that these characters take climate disaster more seriously than anybody else in the book, than basically anybody in the world around us, because they are willing to, eco-terrorism is a problematic category, but as shorthand, they're willing to commit eco-sabotage or eco-terror, right, for the purpose of slowing climate change, right?
And like
And provoking some
forfeit
sort, yes.
a life, right?
Yes, precisely. But all of the characters in their own way, I think all of them we get some interiority for. Obviously Shane, but Murdoch a little bit, Kai a little bit, Quinn a little bit, Alan a little bit, right? Murdoch more than those other members of the principals, are all questioning, like, what the fuck is the point of what we're doing, right? Because, like, Shane and Murdoch have this debate. This is page 200 about, like, are we fighting or are we horseflies? Are we human or are we dancer? Emily is what they're asking. And
now that's
then
going to be in my head all day.
You're welcome. And then even later on, like Shane and Kai in page 208, where they're talking about whether or not to escalate, and if so, where and how, and to what risks and to what end. And so all of these characters are grappling with like the purposefulness or purposelessness of, as you said, giving their lives over to the underworld to try to do this.
Sorry. Yeah, it's really kind of stunning too how the weather like sets the tone for the political stakes. Or
say more, yeah.
I mean, just exactly what you're talking about, right? This tension between pointlessness and purposefulness. That the weather sort of dramatizes that quite literally, I think. I imagine in the scenes where she's driving, right, in the downpour, and they're walking around in the tail end of the dust storm, and she's narrating the degree to which the weather lessens or heightens, depending on the context, the degree to which she engages her tactics for evading surveillance.
Oh, wow.
It's like a literal like commentary on the capacity of anyone to see properly what it is they're doing. Like including the state, including the political questions, including like our ability to navigate a storm in the sort of literal and metaphorical sense. I know, I just thought it was like really, really well interwoven, but also you can't, I don't know, it didn't seem like the weather was merely a prop for that.
Dare we say the weather is an actant?
Yes. I was wondering when we were going to get new materialist up in here. Only a matter of time.
Yeah. I think it's honestly a shock that we made it 13 and a half minutes without bringing in our friend Latour.
Yeah. It's probably right. I know we committed to doing a Foucault treatment in this manifesto, but I feel like there's a lot of other theorists that work as well.
Yeah. I mean, I like the point about the weather not just paralleling or allegorizing the surveillance, but being itself a question of surveillance.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think that this chapter is one of the chapters that I have the most just awe of the ability to write, because of the theoretical but also immediate and affective way that they all experience, think about, talk about surveillance. And it's the surveillance state and surveillance capitalism, and they work together, but they're not exactly the same thing. And so it's working. Like you could teach this in a class, like about political theory class about surveillance. You'd be like, let's look at this as a short story in its own right, about surveillance. And I think you would be successful at doing so, because the near future is used so effectively in this chapter. Because like nothing that gets discussed in terms of surveillance seems implausible, nor do the attempts by 6 Degrees to try to subvert it seem implausible, like tomorrow or a year from now or the 4 years from now in which the novel takes place.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of projection of the technologies and the projection of what it means to live in that state, and the projection of how would activists try to circumvent or exist alongside or within as they end up deciding as an organization,
Mm-hmm.
the surveillance state is so densely plotted. And here I mean plot in like literal sense and literary sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a marvel of writing and thinking.
I made a list of all the like specific technologies that they discuss and
Please.
specific ways they evade.
I love it.
I don't know if I got all of them, but I started thinking about it like a couple pages in. So at her first stop, she's wearing a hat that has some sort of switch in it, which you find
Mhm.
later
Mhm.
is a light that scrambles face recognition.
Yeah.
She follows the speed limit everywhere
Mhm.
and refers to the highways being excessively monitored.
Yeah.
Sort of vaguely. We don't know exactly what, if that's
Mhm.
camera or what. Later, she talks about, I think Alan had his face scanned at a toll booth.
Yep.
And then they talk about the vans having been stripped, right, of any kind of identifying information, but also rerouting a kind of search of it so that it would go through like a series of channels, I think information deflection channels, so it wouldn't be able to be identified. She talks about overhead drones, about long distance microphones and cameras that collect biometric data. She talks about avoiding anything that's networked. So, like, I assume any device that in any way talks to either another device or the internet.
Yes, I think so.
Which is like almost every device in my house.
I mean, I've had this conversation with several people recently that like I went from somebody who like was never a first adopter, but like relatively tech friendly. To now I'm like, I would like zero smart devices among like appliances. And like I live in an apartment, so like it doesn't, I don't get to choose like what the refrigerator is. But like I wouldn't choose a smart refrigerator.
Yeah, me neither. I mean, I am very anti Alexas or Google Homes or whatever, but like, I don't know, we have a receiver that our surround sound speakers are plugged into, and it has a Bluetooth capacity, which means it could ostensibly be connected to a device that's connected to the internet. Like they could all connect in some way if we had it set up that way. But I am also anti, and even so, it's still pervasive in my home. Okay, so anything networked. She talks about an electronic ad, which my guess about how that works from the way it's described in the plot point is, right, it scans her face and runs, it's basically like real-time targeted ads. So it switches from a cigarette advertisement or something to a Subway
ad for the
ad.
Local Subway shop because she had been to one in New Hampshire, like 2 days before.
So she's like, oh shit, it knows where I've been and panics, right? This is her. She made an error there. They don't use any GPS. They only use paper maps. Murdoch's bunker has only off-grid energy. Police cars, we learn, have an X-ray device now.
Yes.
That can scan through the backs of other cars. And she says at some point that it's like unlikely that the car behind her has it, but we learned from one of the text boxes that it does in fact pick her up. And then Quinn is responsible for scrubbing that.
Yep.
I think those are all the ones that I wrote down, but
I think that captures all of it. And I think one of the things,
the spoiler, the bomb that gets dropped at the end.
Yes, which I think we should get to maybe in a slightly different conversation.
Beautiful.
But I love that Shane and Quinn and Alan and Kai and Murdoch have the conversation about how do you exist, and that Markley goes to the trouble of, through the text boxes to some extent, narrating how each of them drop off. It's not just like the conversation they have with one another, and it's Shane's point that like they defeat high-tech military, like with low-tech, like any good insurgency. She says something to that effect after Quinn explains like the depth of the surveillance. And she talks about how like they have, quote, polluted their data with tedium, end quote, or appeared like, quote, average, boring, troubled, lonesome Americans, end quote, who like their conformity. Right. So it's not that they are trying to not exist within these data flows, but rather trying to appear innocuous by overloading the data flows with like buying cheap shit off of Amazon or whatever, and going to all of these places and using the devices and staying networked and presenting them the normal life as much as possible. Murdoch's case is a little bit differently, right? Because he is posing as,
someone
right-wing,
who
incel-y
withdraws.
bro who
Yeah.
loves guns. Yeah.
And that's in part intentional because his previous connection to activism is arguably more suspect, I think, as the bomb maker, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Although that is still to a degree implied in this chapter, which I thought was also very interesting. Like there's
Yes.
all these sort of obtuse references to devices and small scale attacks or like the pipelines sort of rupturing, but there's never says bombs. You know, at one point, Shane says, I shouldn't light a match in here. And he's like, yeah, whatever, man. They'll see it from space. Who cares? Do it. You know, but it's like, and there's all the lists of ingredients. And Shane says, I've seen them assembled, but I've never seen them disassembled. And
Yeah.
but never explicitly refers to what it is when it's assembled,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was very interesting.
Me too. And I will return to that point in my cultural artifact, I think.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Yeah, I was really struck by what was the phrase that you used? Near futureness of this.
Yeah,
And
something like
in
that.
that list, I was like, are some of those things that already exist that I'm just not aware of?
I assume so.
And now I'm thinking about electronic ads on the subway. Like,
Ooh.
do
Facial
they know
recognition
who's
too.
watching them and
Yeah.
that's how they change? Is that a technology that already exists?
I wouldn't put it, I mean, I may, you're more familiar with the MTA these days. The MTAs of when I lived there, like, did not seem technologically capable, but
Yeah. I mean, they still really don't, but but that is an even more interesting question because it's like, oh, the technology is capable, but the city bureaucracy like can't be bothered, you know? So like
right.
this is where surveillance capitalism and the surveillance state aren't always colluding
Yes,
with
yes.
one another.
Neoliberalism like severs that connection
Yeah.
when it comes to public services and public
And
goods.
I think it's telling that for Shane, she doesn't think of the potential for the cop car to have an X-ray device as her biggest faux pas. Her biggest blunder is when the electronic ad recognizes her,
Mhm.
right? Because that
Yes.
establishes an explicit footprint rather than just like catches her somewhere, right?
And that it's the multiple data points of
Right,
that footprint,
right,
right?
right.
In two very different regions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I pitch a theory about this chapter?
Yes.
I think we should partly read this chapter as a little bit of like a key to the entire novel
Mm.
for some of the reasons that we've been talking about already. Like this is the chapter where whether Most has become a character even more so than the Keeper chapter in the Blizzard,
Mm-hmm.
that will continue to be the case.
Mm-hmm.
That we get a deeper presentation of what the state and capital are doing, right, in a way that is mostly passively trying to thwart, right, any disruption of the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And crucially, that we get like thematized the commitment to the cause that the 6 Degrees activists have in their lives, but that's constantly juxtaposed over, are we actually doing anything
Yeah.
and having any sort of effect? It's juxtaposed at several points with Fierce Blue Fire,
Right. Yeah.
right? And then, of course, Shane and Kate, right, are juxtaposed against one another. They are as the juxtaposition of the like joy and camaraderie of Fierce
Mm-hmm.
Blue Fire with the loneliness and isolation and the intentional isolation, right? Their paranoia and isolation are tactics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is I think if that's Shane or Alan who describes it that way, right? So like this is a book in which I think increasingly in this like early middle part of the book, Fierce Blue Fire and 6 Degrees are posed as political foils to one another for
Mm.
what is the proper political response to all of the shakes head at world around themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's something about this particular chapter and like the emotional and affective tonality of it that snaps that into place in a way that kind of transforms the rest of the book to come. And the fact that Shane is herself pulled in so many different directions, right? Because on the 6 Degrees side, it's something that's like deadly serious for her.
Mm-hmm.
And she wants to have kind of absolute, like she has more dedication to the procedures and the security protocols than others do. But also it's like empowering and playful, right? She tags, 6 Degrees is coming in the
Mm-hmm.
bathroom. she's also pulled in the direction of like, well, what is my relationship with my kid in relation to all of this, or like myself as a mother? And that's, which is also a question of her own mother. And it's also she's pulled in the loneliness isolation direction too. And there's something about the kind of like rending apart of Shane that I think ends up standing in for so many bigger things about what the novel is doing.
I hadn't been thinking about this direction with the loneliness discussion, but I just was thinking about Arendt right now while you were talking. Like loneliness as like a sort of political phenomena rather than as a sort of psychological state or pathology or like something that can be cured or treated, right? To sort of tease a little bit of Foucault there. I just was laughing while you were talking because I literally in my notes have a section that says affect, and then my notes there are bird falling out of the sky, remembering her mother, focus on her age and weight, urge to go home / never go back, contempt for unwed mothers. Those were the things I put in my affect section. I mean, it is like quite, I mean, actually depressing, I don't think is the right word. I feel like because Markley's so in tune with the psychic landscape of the plot, the characters, the political stakes, that like if this was a chapter about like feeling depressed in the face of climate change, it would have it wouldn't have been so like heightened, right? Yes. It probably would have been a little duller, more in the malaise rather than the tenseness. What's the word I'm looking for?
Tension.
Tension. Ooh, yeah. Wow. That was embarrassing.
Can I offer like an additional point right on top of that? I think that, you know, whether Markley was doing this intentionally or not, who cares? But I think we can read that as in some ways Markley recognizing the omnipresence of something like capitalist realism, right? This like the cliche of easier to imagine, you know, it's harder to imagine the end of capitalism than the end of the world, right? That like capitalism seems so pervasive, or climate change in this case, it seems so pervasive that like, well, we should just imagine the end of the world rather than like how we might transform the things that are necessary to prevent that from coming into existence. And like the way that Frederick Jameson and then eventually kind of Mark Fisher is the person who like codifies these ideas is like, he talks about it as a kind of like atmosphere on the left of, well, whatever we do, it's never going to be good enough. And like a question of, can this like inspire action, or is it necessarily like pacifistic?
Yeah, it's sort of like almost like a, not perverse, but like a resignation that sort of undermines its stated purpose.
Yes, a resignation in advance, right? And I think that what Fierce Blue Fire and 6 Degrees, and particularly the contrast between the two, what we can take them as, and this actually is maybe the article, is like they're different paths to resist the allure, the like deadening allure of capitalism.
The inevitability.
Vis-a-vis climate, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well, right, because, so I was interested in Quinn's assessment and discussion of our sort of like complicity in both the surveillance state and surveillance capitalism, right? She says, we gladly and willingly submitted ourselves to techno-feudalism. But I wonder, like, you know, Kate is not a techno-optimist.
Definitely
right?
not.
She's also in her own way, like low tech, old school organizing, right?
Yes,
like
very much so.
Let's do mutual aid. Let's go back to
let's
the
forge
earth,
small communities.
Feed ourselves, right? So like in that way, I think you're right that it's not this, I think, overwrought, right, tension between, do we forsake technology or do we ask it to rescue us, right? It's actually two different approaches to the system of like distribution and production of needs and goods, right? So it is about capitalism. It's not about technology.
Yes, I think that's a good way to put it.
Which I think if you were reading it not that closely, you might think about it as the question as a question about technology itself, not a question about political economy.
Yes. Although I'm a little bit, I'm not going to look ahead, but I will not spoil things, that like we get hints of I think, a different perspective on technology, not from Kate, but from Liza, who's like, we can use these oppressive tools for the use of our movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I think she represents a different relationship to technology and capitalism than either Kate or Shane.
Yeah. Interesting. I think to ask the question of technology not as a question of just technology
Yeah.
is A, harder, but B, more relevant. Because,
yes.
and this is maybe anticipating Foucault a little bit, but technology is not neutral.
No.
So yeah, we'll pick up on that thread when we get there.
I have no doubt.
Are there other diagnoses of the current condition that our manifesto is missing?
I think you wanted to include a diagnosis of mothering into our manifesto.
Yes. I mean, another like interesting way, what does feminist ethics have to do with climate change? But I think there's this latent thread in this chapter. Shane, in grappling with driving through the storm and sort of navigating the pull on the one hand to retreat and on the other to just flee, right?
Yes.
She's like called back to memories of her own mother, but it's sort of mixed with memories of the rain, the weather. We get a mention briefly later that she doesn't know where her mother is.
Yep.
Like, and the two options that she posits are dead or on the street. So a sort of implication, right, that things were not good. And then we find out that she herself is a mother, but it's not foregrounded.
No.
And it's not part of her narration of herself, her struggle, or even really her ideological or political hesitations, right?
Totally agree with that.
And she doesn't ever think about out loud to the reader her child until we physically encounter her for the first time, encounter her, which I think is a really interesting way to do it. I think there's a couple different reads on it. Like, one, you could read it as her trying to kind of intentionally create a boundary, right? Maybe whether that's out of fear or self like criticism or loathing, or like a compartmentalizing
compartmentalizing is the exact word that I was thinking of.
Like for, I don't know, emotional necessity or political necessity. Like, to not think the two together maybe means to not open up the door for like having the cost, right, of her commitment to this be her kid. But then you find out that her kid's only 4 and she's been doing this for 14 years.
Yep. She's
a single mother. Her like cover is she works in a diner as a server, and she struggles. She struggles to have her boss take her seriously when she has to bow out of work for taking care of a sick kid. She struggles with the other people, members of the principals or whoever else in 6 Degrees organization, having to pick up slack because of her childcare duties. And even there's an exchange with Kai where Kai says, like, nobody told you to get pregnant, right?
Rough,
and
yeah.
she several times mentions, like, I read Barbara Ehrenreich in college, but
I loved that.
I was unprepared, right? And I assume she's talking about like nickel and dime.
Nickel and dime, yeah.
But like the latent and also explicit acknowledgement that we don't like unwed mothers or that we're willing to sort of submit unwed mothers to scrutiny, like public scrutiny, in a way that is not problematic, right? It's like, you did this, you deserve this, you've offered yourself up to us, so this is your fault. I don't know, it's a really striking way to think about class, like in the context of this book. We've talked about it a lot in the terms of like Ohio, the devastation of the former Rust Belt, or the Rust Belt. But I think to take it up explicitly as a question about the social status of unwed mothers is really, really interesting, and it, I think, makes the question of what's happening in the neoliberal context vis-a-vis class like a bit more universal than maybe the kind of geographic specificity of Ohio. I don't know. I thought it was like really well done and really hard to read.
Especially because I think that it's not just a commentary on, okay, society doesn't like unwed mothers. Society doesn't like unwed mothers of color in particular, right? But also even in a radical leftist organization, her motherhood is made to be is understood as a problem, right, by the other like principles of 6 degrees, right? So in the sphere, in the group of people for whom this should not be an issue, right? There's something about the like inability to find a place for her motherhood in broader society, which like tells her she's an unwed single mother, and that's terrible. It's a woman of color. And also within 6 degrees, like there's no room for her there either. So like just the total alienation from any possibility of integrating herself as a mother into any aspect of her life, right? To the way that you started this conversation, that like, of course, her relationship to Lolly can only ever be right separate from every other part of her lives, because nowhere is there like a discourse, a social, like a hegemonic permission structure, like any sort of notion of legitimacy, public legitimacy for that part of her life, either in her like straight life or in her I'm a radical eco-saboteur life.
Yeah. It's really, I think it's well done.
Agreed. Yeah.
I'm curious. I didn't remember, like, I remembered that she had a daughter, but I didn't remember that that's the way we get introduced to her daughter.
Same.
And I think it was really, it changes to the point that you're making the question of Shane sort of more broadly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure does.
Yeah. And, so there is a point where we talked about this already in the discussion of technology where Quinn says we gladly and willingly submitted ourselves to this thing. And I think this is not said, right? Like Kai says, no one told you to have a kid, but the sort of implication there is that you gladly and willingly, right, submitted yourself to this. And so you don't,
that's a good read.
So like you don't have, grounds to, I don't know, make demands about it or something. It's like kind of unclear what flows from that. But I do think it's implied.
Well, because the specific context is like Shane's asking for a couple $100 more a month from the organization.
Yeah.
Right? Because she has a kid.
Yeah. And so like to draw the parallel to Quinn's comment, like what is it in Quinn's view we're not allowed to ask for? Are we not allowed to ask for privacy, or maybe privacy is like not sufficient to capture what rights we've forfeited or something in like willingly and gladly submitting ourselves to techno fascism,
or like because we've done that, we don't deserve any zone in which we are insulated or shielded from that in any aspect of one's life or something. Maybe that's the thing we're not allowed to have because we didn't read any of the terms and conditions of any of the 1,000 websites and apps we've given our data to.
Like, I sort of wonder what the 6 degrees view is on like what people deserve. Like, okay, so
yeah,
they're obviously very critical of politics as usual. Very.
Oh, you mean the insipid sham election of Mary Randall and the like wastefulness of Fierce Blue Fire, just getting people to occasionally march and post things on Twitter and not doing anything?
Yes. But there is this other, I think, like disdain for people who do nothing, that aren't part of the political machine. But they like don't leave until it's too late. They don't care about anything except making their paycheck. And so it's like, who is the sabotage for, is I think a question for me.
And I think a question for members of the movement.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a heighten the contradictions thing is I think part of the, it's like, what is the social movement strategy, right? Is the question, if we could even call it a movement, and like maybe for our reasons we shouldn't. So it's like a heighten the contradictions. And I think that, and I think this gets discussed more in the next Shane chapter, but like this question of the logic is make it too expensive to continue to extract and be in the business of fossil fuels.
Right. But that doesn't deliver anything to anyone,
No.
which is kind of an interesting strategy. Like in that way, Kate at least is like, people can't eat, people can't drink water. And like there's a way in which she is more concerned with sort of like daily material needs that flow from a capitalist system that has like on the one hand produced excess and on the other hand rendered it so that so many people can't meet their basic needs, right?
I mean, I'm just a Kate wishing that he was a Shane,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think.
Do they
We'll have to
come
revisit that one.
together? Or can they? Like, can those two approaches to like who deserves
you
what?
want to dialectically bring them together? Is what
Yes,
you're
I
telling
do.
me?
I do.
I'm here for that, obviously.
Um,
I think the book is constantly asking that question and gives us, off the top of my head, 4 different opportunities to discuss that precise question later on.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, well, let's keep it a question then.
You pointed this out, Emily, but the end changes like the whole relationship to technology and also kind of the plot mechanics a little bit, because Shane has made very, very oblique references that she has one other mission or task that no one else knows about and one other stop to make. And what we find out towards the very end is that she has cultivated a source who works for a private contractor for the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, who is on the like most inside of what the surveillance state is up to, at least, and how the surveillance state is drawing on the surveillance capitalism. And it kind of underwrites what is the like key reason that they think they can evade from earlier in the chapter, right? So on page 193, after describing all the technologies, right, Shane says something, or maybe this was Quinn, about how, quote, complex data still awaited a tool capable of narrative organization, end quote. And then we get at the very end of the chapter, right, Shane reveals to Kai that maybe that technology has arrived. And the description of it I love so much, right? It's a new AI project working with megadata. Apparently, it can identify and conceptualize data points in ways even the people who built it can't understand, which is just an incredible line. The way it was explained to me, you give these algorithms a suspect and they can backfill their entire inner lives, basically read a person's mind.
Right. So the fear is that they could reconstruct
Exactly.
like Shane's participation in 6 Degrees when
Yes.
Shane has consciously made an effort to publicly perform, I guess, something else, or
precisely because they've decided to participate in data valence so as to remain hidden.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which is also a breach of trust in the organization, right? Because like Kai is like, why? How could you have done this? Like, you didn't talk about this with any of us.
Yeah.
You literally like have someone in the FBI or a private firm that works for the FBI doing this, and that's like, I think, read by Kai is a bit of a betrayal.
But I think her reason makes sense, though,
yes,
right? It's
it
like
does.
it's a risk to have her know too much, but also to have people know about her, right?
Of
Threatens.
course.
But it is interesting, and I felt this way reading the novel the first time. I felt like these chapters were always a little the realisticness of them always felt hard for me to grasp, because it seems, and I think this is something that Shane is getting at. 14 years since the first chapter. There's been like a couple disruptions to fossil fuel provision. They've mostly been spending time cultivating, right, these cells, these networks, collecting materials, but it's incredibly slow. And mostly what they're worried about is not getting caught. But there's sort of like at some point it's like not getting caught doing what? You know what I
This
mean?
is Murdoch's point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emily's not Shane. She's a Murdoch. Yeah.
I think I am, actually.
I buy it.
Yeah, I don't really care about the climate change things, but I'll make some bombs. Get some cool posters along the road. Yeah.
Yeah. Great posters.
Yeah, I just like I guess the question of how feasible is it really to evade surveillance, A, and B, to like make a compelling data trail that is in some ways disconnected completely from the real trail. Like, how is that even possible, first of all?
I wish I knew.
And like,
my strategy of being 10% harder to hack than the average person on the internet is as far as I've gotten.
But how do you even know that that's true?
Like a lot of two-factor authentications, a good password manager, you know.
Yeah.
Like I'm a medium target. I'm not an easy target. That's the goal.
Yeah. I think it's there is something about it that feels like it's an exercise in futility. And I think that that's maybe one of the questions or one of the.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's precisely right. As witnessed by the final line of the chapter, right? Which is like the most feudal or most resigned or maybe most capitalist realist of it all, right? So Shane is driving on her way to work, right? By the time she reached the highway, the billboards again beamed brightly. All around her, omnicidal frequencies cruise the airwaves. Holy shit, omnicidal frequencies.
Yeah.
That's our band.
Oh
and
my God,
she could
yes.
feel each and every one of them adrift, sagging into the long night of extinction that lay.
So great. So brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Extinction was another theme that really stood out to me in this chapter. Like the bird falls from the sky. She's thinking constantly about species that could be here but aren't, like either haven't been ever or haven't
the mountain
been.
gorillas, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then Murdoch's reading
which are in her dreams and in her reality, right?
Yeah.
They've so pervaded all of it.
Yeah. Murdoch is reading a book called The Last of the Wild, which is not a real book. I looked it up.
Same.
Yeah. I was like, wait, this is weird because it seems like it would be real.
It sure does.
And I think it's interesting that he chose to make up a book there rather than reference something that is real, because a lot of those references are real.
Almost all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, like, and I'm trying to think, when did Elizabeth Colbert's book, the Sixth Great Mass Extinction, or whatever it's called, come out?
I don't think after this novel, did it?
Yeah, The Sixth Extinction on Natural History by Elizabeth Colbert is that's a 2014 book.
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say it was like late 10s, but I was very wrong.
Yeah, it's just, and I wonder, okay, obviously like extinction is a real material problem, right? With like species diversity, ecosystems, like, but also there's a specter of like human extinction, I guess. But also I'm like, is it also being taken up metaphorically? And what is the metaphor?
Ooh. Okay, I'll give a couple shots at that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a little bit like kind of like, like spiritual extinction or something, right? Like the kind of, and the willingness to resist the data surveillance and the willingness to resist surveillance capital and the willingness to like try to disrupt the ongoing extraction fueling the extinction, right? So there's like a kind of like resignation that's a kind of like spiritual extinction is I think maybe what's happening there. I think there's also a commentary on Shane like feeling something like the mountain gorilla potentially having gone extinct, like more deeply. Like I agree that like the sixth great extinction is extremely material, but it can and is for me such an abstract thing.
Yeah.
Right. That I can and often and usually do avoid it.
Yeah.
Right. There's a pre-established like permission structure and like epistemological route to remain ignorant of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, in that way, I think it's like analogous to Quinn's description of why we can't comprehend the surveillance state.
Oh, that's a great point.
Right? Like we can't comprehend extinction either, maybe.
Yeah.
Really.
Although, as you know, more than I do, right? Obviously one of the questions of environmental political thought is like, how do you even think a problem like climate change? Do we have the categories, narratives, concepts, standpoints, whatever, epistemology to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And if we can't even think extinction, and that's one little thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. One little other very small point. When Shane and Kai are walking through the dust storm and they only have the baby monitor as the one potential technology that can spy on them. they pause at one point in their conversation because a woman with a hoverboard is boarding by them. What do you riding by them?
I love boarding. I think boarding is
boarding by
hovering. Yeah,
hovering near. But I think they stop for one, like not to have the conversation overheard by a person, but also for two, there's an implication that like maybe the board can hear them.
Honestly, I had never thought of that, but I love this theory.
Okay, that's where my mind went initially, but maybe I'm just like going to whatever. But
it's a great mind.
The defining feature of this woman is that she has like her part of her head shaved, and she has a tattoo of a saprophytic mushroom, which I thought was like a really random thing to specifically reference. So a saprophytic mushroom is like the mushrooms that you picture when you picture a mushroom, right? The kind of caps. There's some that have like the red tops with the white dots, like Alice in Wonderland mushrooms. But they are decomposers that grow on decaying wood, and basically their ecosystem function is to like help transition something from decay into like other organic matter, which like that introduces another layer, I think, into the extinction question.
Yes.
Like, is it extinction or is it like decay to become sort of like something else? Or what is, I don't know, what is the role of decay in something like climate crisis, or I don't know, like a political response to a cannibalizing, right, like political economy? Or
I love this point, because one of the other things we can think about with extinction, I don't know if this is metaphorical or not, is the ease with which we could throw out a, well, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
Right? And just like the ease with which that comes out of the mouth, and the circuits of thought that just saying that prevent being like, no, in 2082, not all humans are going to be gone, almost certainly, but like how many millions or more than millions, right? We need bigger number category will have died, or have our climate refugees and migrants are facing, extreme deprivation, are whatever, the more concrete, more manifestly and materially like thinkable deprivations and violences. We can short circuit all of those if we just be like, well, all the humans are going to die. And I'm certainly guilty of this. I'm not saying that like some nebulous they.
Oh yeah, this is my line when people talk about how they feel pressure to own a home or something. I'm like, well, first of all, home ownership is a scam. Second of all, we're all going to be dead anyway, so who cares? But again, it's foreclosing on intentionally, right? And somewhat playfully grappling with the degree to which we have perhaps gladly and willingly served ourselves up to to the ownership.
I can't think of a better way to end a manifesto than that. Or diagnosis in the manifesto than that.
Beautiful. Shall we transition into our what others have gotten wrong or right?
Yeah, clearly Markley thinks that Foucault, like Markley has read Foucault, right? Like this is now canonical?
Yes.
Okay.
Definitely. I mean, at the very least, the panopticon section of discipline.
Sure. Yeah, that's totally fine. But like this is the quote from Shane: "No need to stand over all 346 million residents with weapons 24 hours a day. The algorithms could classify you as part of a community of interest." Like that's the whole point of the panopticon. Like literally. Yeah.
It's not that everyone is being watched every second. It's that you don't know when you are for certain being watched or not being watched, right?
Yes. Yeah. Paired with like the total transparency that you don't need the guard who may or may not be in the watchtower in the circular benthamite prison, but you do need the algorithms, the data tools, the willingness to submit to them, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean Foucault is there.
Yeah, it's in the name. Like
it's in the name. It's in the name. Okay, so we had proposed to take up Foucault, but to take up other parts of Foucault from the Panopticon.
Yes.
And to surprise, I thought about trying to go like obscure, but I ended up maybe doing a little bit of a cheat.
I think it's possible we ended up on the exact same thing, because I had the same process. I was like, I'm going to find some like, History of Sexuality, Volume 3, like the bonus track that no one listens to, only the hipsters know.
Okay, do you have your book there? Should we show each other at the same time?
Yeah. Okay.
Is it the same?
3, 2, 1. No, we did go differently. Okay, good.
Okay. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
You should go first.
Okay, so I went to Society Must Be Defended, and I'm interested in the moment where Foucault is arguing about the transformation from political right as sort of disciplinary to political right as biopolitical.
Perfect.
And I actually have a question that I wonder, is there actually a tension between describing or mapping disciplinary power and describing or mapping biopolitical power? And I want to ask that question, which I feel like is a question we talked about in Roz's class, Roz Wachowski's class,
we sure did.
Biopolitics.
Yep.
But I want to take us back to that question in the context of this chapter. So in Society Must Be Defended. That was a weird slip.
I would love that. That's the fan fiction.
Society might be defended.
That's the utopian alternative, is that maybe society.
Okay, so this is in the lecture from 17th March 1976. So
great.
Chapter 11 in Society Must Be Defended. And Foucault argues it seems one of the basic phenomena of the 19th century was what might be called power's hold over life. And then he's talking about this sort of transition. So on 240, if we take the argument a little further or to the point where it becomes paradoxical, it means that in terms of his relationship with the sovereign, the subject is, by rights, neither dead nor alive. From the point of view of life and death, the subject is neutral. And it is thanks to the sovereign that the subject has the right to be alive or possibly the right to be dead. In any case, blah, blah, blah. This is the theoretical paradox. And then it has a corollary, right, for that is practical. So he says, what does the right of life and death actually mean? Obviously not that the sovereign can grant life in the same way that he can inflict death. The right of life and death is always exercised in an unbalanced way. The balance is always tipped in favor of death. Sovereign power's effect on life is exercised only when the sovereign can kill. So there's something about like the right and the exercise of that right that's distinct.
I love that. Yeah.
Which I think is a parallel to what we were just talking about the power of surveillance, right? That it's like the right to surveil doesn't mean that the right is always being exercised. Yes. It's like the threat of the right almost. I don't know. Or the possibility of the right's realization.
Yes. The virtual.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And so he says it's essentially the right of the sword. There's no real symmetry in the right over life and death. It is not the right to put people to death or to grant them life, nor is it the right to allow people to live or to leave them to die. It is the right to take life or let live. And this obviously introduces a startling dissymmetry. And then this next paragraph is kind of like the classic,
yeah.
The classic, but also the vulgar almost, Foucault, if you will. So I think that one of the greatest transformations political right underwent in the 19th century was precisely that. I wouldn't say exactly that sovereignty's old right to take life or let live was replaced, but it came to be complemented by a new right, which does not erase the old right, but which does penetrate it, permeate it. This is the right, or rather precisely the opposite right. It is the power to make, live, and let die. Make and let in quotation marks. The right of sovereignty was the right to take life or let live. And then this new right is established, the right to make, live, and to let die. So in this book, Foucault talks about that as like a transition from disciplining people to managing populations, right? So this is the shift in governmentality, right? In the kind of technology of governance. And then, a whole bunch of stuff flows from there in critical theory, right? About like using the sort of biological metaphor as a way to think about what governments, states, and arguably economies do vis-a-vis managing populations, whether that's citizens or consumers, right, in the 20th into the 21st century. So I think that what's happening in this chapter is there is the panopticon of surveillance, right? There's the cameras that we're dodging or like fooling, right?
Yes.
And with the knowledge that we may be being watched, but we may not be, or we might be outsmarting the surveyors because we understand that they can only survey so much, even if we don't know the full scope of their reach, their power, their capacity, their technology. But there's also this other thread in the chapter that's about like death, the capacity to live, what it means to live well. And
Mm-hmm.
and like there's an interplay between those two. I don't even know what the right metaphor is to think about how they relate to one another. Like
Vectors.
vectors, like I was going to say planes, but I don't want to say that they're like on distinct planes from one another.
Right.
But I think vectors
Yeah.
works, right? And so the question is, what is the relationship of the disciplinary regime to the biopolitical regime? So this like what happened to Oklahoma City? Is it gone? Did the people leave? Did the infrastructure crumble? Did the state like let the dust storm consume the population and thus like render them dead? And if you are let dead, are you no longer an object of surveillance? Or like what happens to the promise or the threat or whatever of disciplinary power on the like death side of the life and death equation?
I mean, this is the question of so much critical theory sent in the last 30 years at this point, right? Like
Yeah.
this is Agamben, this
Mm-hmm.
is like Deleuze on on trying to like rethink those categories in Foucault. This is Roberto
Yeah.
Esposito on bios, right? Like
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
so many different things. And like I think that posing this in the context of this chapter of this novel is really poignant, right? Because I think that, the members of Six Degrees are, I think, trying to like cut through that like binary of
Mm-hmm.
the making live and letting die, or the letting live and making die,
Mm-hmm.
and trying to say that like somewhere in the midst of that there can be an attempt to recover and assert, where there's power, where there's resistance, sort of stuff. Like we can make our own decisions about life and potentially our own deaths in the process
Yeah.
by risking ourselves, by becoming isolations, like little isolated monads
Well,
that are in
and
this network, and trying to use the tools of the disciplinary
Mhm.
society and our recognition as members of populations that like Murdoch is just like another white guy with a bunch of guns in an empirical population of white guys with a bunch of guns, right?
Mhm.
Class to be managed. Um, like I don't know, maybe there's that kind of reading of it.
Yeah, and I think that like this puzzle, like, can you, I don't know, usurp or harness or m- use the power, like sovereign power, to resist the sovereign. And I think so. The place where this actually came together for me is when Murdoch and Shane are arguing, and Murdoch, I think, says something to along the lines of like, "This is how you fight an empire."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "What an interesting term to use there," because right, it isn't just it's like sovereign plus, and I think it implies the relationship of empire to capitalism as well.
So Murdoch has read Heart and agree.
I I think so. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
This-
wonder too if what maybe what Markley is offering us as a reading of 6 Degrees is that they've willingly and gladly submitted themselves to disciplinary power in order to co-opt that right over their own life and death.
that is a much better way of what I stumbled towards over like 2 minutes. That's a much better way of saying that.
But I mean, I think maybe it's a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit less sophisticated, but
No, it's not, because like I mean this is the thing Foucault is always doing, right? Some of his categories are actually quite simple,
that's
regardless of the
true.
depth and complexity,
Yeah.
right? And like biopower and disciplinary power are very much in that group of concepts.
Yeah, right. And I think for Shane, the like degree to which she both has and doesn't have power over her own life and
Mhm.
death is part of what I read as the like psychic angst, right? Of like wanting to go home or to never go home, right?
Right,
And like
right.
that to me just seems like a very clear way to think about the anxiety of who has power over life and death.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of an obvious Foucault.
I'm going to give you an
angle.
even more obvious Foucault, but I think it actually raises some of the similar questions.
Of course.
So this will surprise no one, in the method chapter in History of Sexuality, Volume 1, where he's like, here is what power is, right?
Mhm.
So I'm going to read a bit from, this is page 93 of the vintage History of Sexuality volume. Power is the moving substrate of force relations, which, by virtue of their inequality, constantly engender states of power, but the latter are always local and unstable. The omnipresence of power, not because it has the privilege of consolidating everything under its invincible unity, but because it is produced from one moment to the next, at every point, or rather in every relation from one point to another. Power is everywhere, not because it embraces everything, but because it comes from everything. And power, insofar as it is permanent, repetitious, inert, and self-reproducing, is simply the overall effect that emerges from all of these mobilities, the concatenation that rests on each of them and seeks in turn to arrest their movement, which just struck me as an incredible theoretical tool to encapsulate the what is power doing to each of these individual, or with or on each of these individual members of 6 Degree, right? It's can we find enough concatenation of data points where power is being exercised in order to have them coalesce together, right? But it also, I think, raises the question that so concerns Shane at the very end of the chapter, with this new AI tool, because in some ways, the way she describes that AI tool actually goes beyond what Foucault talks about, right? For him, it's the omnipresence of power is not because it has the privilege of consolidating everything under its invincible unity. But this chapter is raising the question of, what if it could?
Yeah.
And what if it could through both disciplinary and biopolitical techniques, right? It's both the surveillance, and we have to assume some of the biometric management of populations, and the backfilling happens vis-a-vis some of the data science-y, public health, et cetera, things that he's so interested in. And the lectures that come after Society Must Be Defended. So in some ways that this chapter raises the question of, what if Foucault was right but didn't go far enough?
Yeah. Ooh, I love that.
Or what if we have transcended Foucault in this particular way? And granted, this is a thing that lots of people have thought about since Foucault himself.
Yeah.
But if we maintain the panopticon, this chapter shows that the panopticon and Foucault's analysis of the panopticon is absolutely present and is nonetheless insufficient, right, on some level, when we get to the scale of data availability.
Wow. For some reason, that makes it feel more
terrifying.
Yeah. I was going to say nefarious, insidious,
yes.
just scary than it already did reading the chapter.
Absolutely.
I mean, Foucault is really good for making you afraid of things that you would otherwise consider as mundane features of your daily life.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love
a good healthy fear.
Yeah, absolutely. I've loved assigning that chapter of just the method chapter in History of Sexuality and asking students to draw it.
I love that.
Things. I have a very, very vivid memory of being in the Hunter 17th floor middle classroom, having folks draw Foucault power, that passage.
I think it's so funny that pedagogical strategy is just they are always super skeptical at the beginning, and then they come up with such good stuff. It's see, you don't trust me.
Yeah. Do you want my theory about that?
Yeah.
It's because they're skeptical of the analog, but the analog speaks to them so deeply on some level that they don't necessarily get to do in the rest of their lives.
Oh, I love that.
I have to talk with other people that I'm physically present with and draw out a thing by hand or diagram a thing by hand. That's my theory.
I think that's great. I believe it.
Thank you.
Wow. Love Foucault.
Love him.
Should we talk about some cultural artifacts?
We should. Mine are incredibly obvious. Does that mean I should go first or second?
Go first.
Okay. It's really hard not to read this chapter and avoid thinking about the movie How to Blow Up a Pipeline.
Yeah.
Because this chapter, this is the How to Blow Up a Pipeline chapter, because you have the tracing of how all of the different materials and the people came to be in the same place at the same time in order to try to do the same thing. And there's so many, the like in the timeline of the eco sabotage, they arrive at different points, right? Because like there is this, dozen plus year history of 6 degrees, and How to Blow Up a Pipeline is narrating like a group of mostly disparate or disconnected people who are coming together in one moment who didn't have those prior connections and building that up over time or whatever. But the how do we get the materials together? In some ways, the like structure of that movie where there is the like, the plot unfolds over time, but it's always constantly intercut with like the background of how each of the characters came to be in that place in the main timeline. Like has the analogy would be the text boxes in this chapter and this novel more broadly. The fact that you have the same like, diverse, like in the most basic sense of the term, like crew of people who are only in this one place together because of their mission, their cause, their commitment, is something that they're sharing as well. And then also some of like the tensions within the group. And there was a couple of points that you've been identifying in the chapter that like I was, not thinking this when I was before coming to the episode, that are very similar to some of the questions that the characters are raising in How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Well, and especially your question of, well, what is all this for other people who are not the members of 6 Degrees plotting to blow up this pipeline, right? And there's this debate between a couple of characters, right? One of whom has lost her mother, right, due to pollution because they grew up near next to an oil refinery in Long Beach, right? And and her girlfriend is like, well, this isn't going to bring your mom back, A, and B, like, what positive vision of the world are you actually constructing by doing this? But yet that character is still like there to try to carry off this mission, right? So there's something that like even the skepticism that gets voiced, whether it's the 6 Degrees members or whether it's the like motley crew getting the team together of How to Blow Up a Pipeline, like they're still going to try to do the thing.
Yeah.
And so there's something about like that particular complex, like character complexity and willingness and like, like leap of faith that like, I don't know if this is actually meaningful, but like, I'm still going to fucking do it.
Yeah.
Paired with a couple diehards as well. Just as I think it's like, there's a reason that like I split this book in half by being like, we're going to read half of it. Then we're going to watch How to Blow Up a Pipeline. Then we're going to read the other half.
I love that. Yeah. I think that but you're pointing out more than just sort of surface level similarities between the movie and the book, right?
That's the goal. Yeah.
Okay. I also went with the movie, but slightly different take here. Go with me. I want to pair this chapter with the movie Memento.
Oh my God.
Okay.
Okay.
For a couple reasons.
I'm ready.
One, I was very struck by the two of the Murdoch text boxes that are just sort of dropped there and not interrogated. Please. So there's one that sort of seems to be like some of his inner monologue that is like, hold on, what page is this on?
This may be the 196 text box.
Yes. Okay, so Murdoch trusted Shane and Kai, didn't always appreciate the contortions they built into every operation, and then all that you leave keys under passenger side doors, an unknown kid picks it up. That's a lot for his brain to keep straight. And then he says whenever he briefly forgot what the others looked like, he'd review a note he'd written to himself that he kept in a junk drawer at home. Probably not great to have around if the ATF ever descended, but it kept him straight when he got their coded messages and couldn't remember who they were from or what he was doing. Which there's reference in the first Shane chapter to his PTSD and his memory loss. And we've been talking about memory kind of in all the chapters, but this was very strikingly like different way of treating it to me. It's like absent from the overall plot. And it like this idea that he is so integral to this incredibly disruptive and like multi-faceted, multi-pronged sabotage plot and like does not sometimes remember what he is doing or who he is doing it with just feels bananas. And like I don't know if that's a commentary on the military and PTSD, or if it's
I
like,
think so.
or if it serves like a bigger, more metaphorical plot point. But I thought it was really an interesting way to think about what's happening here, and to think about the clandestine. And then we get the note itself, where
Oh,
it's just a description of the people, right?
yes.
So Kai, black, maybe some Oriental in him, nice guy shtick, thinks he's in charge. Alan, all bald, wizened, blah, 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 right? And these are his both like character assessments and like literal physical descriptions of these
Mhm.
people, so he can remember who they
Uh-huh.
are.
And notes to himself about those people, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Shane's a Mexican hottie. Don't be weird. Like,
yeah.
and I was thinking about like Memento, right, is a movie about a guy that is where the timeline's all messed up.
Yes.
Someone has killed his wife. He has like every 15 minutes memory loss. So he has to
Mhm.
surround himself with a trail of clues that he can somewhat easily decipher to move him from like one 15-minute increment to the next 15-minute increment to exact revenge, right? And
Yep.
then you find out kind of in the end that things weren't what they seemed. And
You might say.
you might say, right? And like, so there's both a question of who's who at different
Mhm.
moments, and also
Mhm.
who has killed who is dead, and who is alive.
Yeah.
Um, which is something we've been talking about a little bit in the context of Foucault, death and life, and
Well,
like,
it's also, are these characters like psychologically alive or psychically dead,
yes,
right?
yeah, like who is Shane really? Is she like the mother worrying about her kid, or is she the woman, in the wig, like fighting this crusade, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I just was thinking that also like the low techness of it, and
Oh,
the
yeah.
like, so Shane says this is the best way to be insurgent against a high tech sort of enemy, is to be low tech. But I wonder if there's also not something sort of like metaphorically more like tactile and tangible about
I think
low
there is.
tech that maybe helps with the other stuff we've been talking about, the like what's it all for, right? Like,
Mhm.
she is actually doing something in a way. I mean, she's like spending weeks on end driving miles and miles to transport one thing from another, but like some of it's super mundane. It's like coding a message, leaving it in a mailbox, and then like waiting for someone to retrieve it and like hope that they get it,
Mhm.
which is like kind of analogous to some of the mementos in Memento, right? It's like,
Yeah.
how do you make sure that the gimmick that you've conceived of is actually like doing the thing that you have set it up to do?
Mhm.
And like, I think Memento poses the question of what if you got it wrong? And we haven't necessarily broached that question in the book, but I don't think it's off the table.
It's not.
Yeah. So that was my proposal.
That's an incredible proposal. It kind of makes me want to go watch Memento
I know,
tonight,
me too. I
but
haven't watched it in a really long time.
same.
I was like, wait, who's the killer? I don't, yeah, I had to like look up some details, but
We should also know the cultural artifacts in this chapter itself, and there's one in particular I want to highlight. So there's the stand, right? Like
mhm.
that's their cipher. That's how they translate like the lottery numbers on these flyers that they're circulating to communicate the messages, like refer to pages and stuff in the stand. But
Mhm.
then, crucially, in general, crucially for both Emily and I, right? Shane's secret cipher with her secret FBI source is Parable of the Sower.
So perfect.
Emily, I wanted to imagine that I have like thought of this class with a lot of help from you that I'm teaching last semester, where I'm like, okay, we're going to read The Deluge, we're going to watch some climate movies, and then we're going to read Parable of the Sower, having completely forgotten and maybe never picked up in the first place.
That
But
was the
like the
cipher.
Parable of the Sower
Yeah.
is like the literal like legend or cipher for a central dynamic within this book. And then I pointed it out to my students and I was like, see, we are doing this right. Look at this. Look at what we did
And
and
they were
what
like,
we're going to accomplish.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
precisely.
amazing. I love that
That's
so much.
okay because the self-deprecation works.
I-
I also couldn't get All Along the Watchtower out of my head with relation to this
Mm,
chapter
yeah.
because it's like the combination of the panopticon of it all, plus the fact that I just watched the trailer for A Complete Unknown where Timmy
Oh,
Chalamet is Bob Dylan. So
so
it
funny.
was in my brain,
I
and
loved all the press photos from that.
yeah.
I'm going to also throw two other cultural artifacts in the mix. In Kai's text box, he talks about his disillusionment with hashtag movements
Yeah.
on the internet, and He literally makes reference to the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
Sure does.
Which I think we have already talked about, haven't we? Or have we not? Because I think
We're always already
we're always already talking about it, yeah. And then also I wanted to pose Nixon's slow violence as a way to read the argument between Kai and Shane at the end when they're talking about the pace. So Shane says, what page is this on? On 208.
Great.
So he makes a joke about Kate being hot. She runs away. And he says, the fuck. And she says, I didn't drive 2,000 miles, so you can treat this like a joke. And then he says, obviously, I don't think it's a joke, using her old name, Alvarez. And she says, we're moving too slowly. We're wasting our time on cheap bullshit. He says, I wouldn't call what we're planning cheap bullshit by any measure. She says, we need to escalate. We need to start executing more quickly. He says, quick gets us caught. And she says, and slow gets us killed. Slow ends our world. And I think that that's both like a diagnosis of the present and a prediction.
Yes.
And I couldn't help but think about slow violence and like the environmentalism of the poor, right? That had attack between like almost between Kate's vision and the 6 Degrees vision, right? Between the urgency and the immediacy of the everyday subsistence needs and the question of like, what can we hope for? Yeah. So I just wanted to flag Nixon there.
I love that.
Now we have to make our necessary manifesto sarcastic digs at our opponents. AKA millennial LOLs.
Murdoch like has so perfectly inhabited his persona, right? His intro to Shane, who arrives in her wig, of course, is you make a pretty blonde, or do gals not like being called pretty anymore on account of the Me Too? How long? And then she asked him, how long have you been waiting to use that one? It just...
Yeah, basically everything that he says to me was very LOL in this. Like all the posters he's accumulated. What's the hate? The
hunt all traitors to extinction or something like that.
And he seems to like genuinely be having fun with his persona, which I think is really interesting because I also, and maybe this is like a weird thing. Tell me if this is true for you, but like I find myself, 2 of the characters I root for the most are Murdoch and Keeper. And I'm like, why? And I don't know what that is, but I'm like, I find it charming that he finds humor in this like persona that he's putting on that I would normally like never have anything in common with or desire to speak with whatsoever. It's weird.
Well, I mean, it speaks to our millennial love of things meta, right? Because he's doing that in a meta way, but we'll always get tempted by the like, what if I lapse into that identity? Especially to your point from a couple minutes ago, if I can't keep things straight.
Yeah. Oh man.
And that's the meta-ness and the irony is catnip for us, I think.
It's so good. Okay, who are we in solidarity with?
I can offer a couple more jokes.
Oh yes, please.
And millennial humor. Well, the lines he has about the other principals is I think fucking hilarious.
So good.
And the bit that he does with Shane about how Shane says, you're going full survivalist on me, Kel. Y'all keep telling me the world's coming to an end. You and me could be real cozy in this place is all I'm saying.
So
Come
good.
on, cook me dinner with your nuclear bunker food, which is great. You pointed out the Barbara Ehrenreich joke. We made fun of the enrollments dropping at University of Kansas after the dust storm joke, as they're spending millions of dollars to tunnel into the core of the earth to find water. And then one of the best lines, there's no collective bargaining.
Oh, yeah. I love that one.
Yeah.
So good. So good.
So many allies, so many people that we're in solidarity with.
Yes.
I love the way we get the bits and pieces of these characters.
Yeah.
All of whom are fascinating on their own terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like Alan is the one we get the least of.
Yes.
He's sort of like a folksy professor, and that's kind of all we know about him.
Yes, but that's like his method of recruiting people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then Quinn's like a tech genius.
I thought Quinn's text box was actually like very poignant in a certain kind of way. It's like this is 198, and it's like goes to that loneliness point, right? Quinn, who dealt with supposedly non-hierarchical consensus decision, which also is just a great line, figured the dynamic out quickly, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, Quinn crawls into a new life of suffocating emotional isolation. She would be on dates in San Francisco and sometimes and feel the urge to simply confess the entire operation to a boring programmer talking himself up. She often woke up from nightmares of being caught while simultaneously wishing sometimes that it would just happen. It's an incredible portrait, both of the so I get the full vision of her as the former hacktivist who went into Silicon Valley, but then also is obviously has this exterior relationship to that. And the emotional isolation. It's there's so much of Quinn just in that one paragraph from the text box of questionable origin.
Yeah, I think too, I had written LOL in this margin too. This idea of the urge to confess to a boring programmer talking himself up is also so
Amazing.
perfect because that guy's not even going to hear it, the confession. Oh, man.
Check out Crandall et al.
Yeah.
2021 for more.
So true. Valley of the Boys. Yeah, Kai is interesting too. I feel like he arguably a little bit occupies almost the villain place in this chapter. A
little bit,
just with the tension and some of the resentment, and that sentence that where he talks about watching her almost wake up her daughter and then fighting the urge to be like, come on, lady, can't you just take care of your kid, is whew, brutal.
Rough.
But they're obviously on the same team or on the same side. So I think it's an interesting tension and another really important link to the how to blow up a pipeline, like you were talking about there too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Who else?
We have Jancy or Jancy, who we meet at the very beginning, who is the leader of the mythical second cell.
Second cell, which we don't know yet what it does.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then we have her secret source in counterterrorism, FBI, public-private partnership world.
And we do not know who that is.
No. And you can correct me if I'm wrong. I've read this book twice. I don't actually know who this is. There are other secrets that we either find out or are given enough information to find out.
Yeah.
And I may just be bad at this kind of reading, but I've never figured out who this source is.
Okay, we'll see if we can figure it out.
Yeah. Reddit couldn't figure it out either. There's a thread. There's a thread on the Deluge post on R or whatever kind of books.
Yeah.
And no one could figure out who Tinkerbell was.
Wait, there is a reference to, so we have another reference to Jen Braden here.
Yes.
Who's the conservative slap world, or what do they call him?
slap world. Oh, God.
Sorry. I forgot what they're
called. They're world ease in slapdish.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And then they make a reference to asking Tracy Amanzaiho for more money.
Yes.
Are we supposed to be is that a joke?
It's a joke because she is the AOC of this more slightly more union coded.
Okay.
Coming from organized labor.
Right. So the idea that
AOC.
she would be involved in sabotage is supposed to be humorous. Okay, cool.
Yes.
I was I feel like I'm missing this joke here.
Yeah. I at least that's how I understood it.
Beautiful.
I think we should point out that there's some allusions with some of these characters that are just worth thinking about. And one of them is Kai, who has a postcard that is like their other postcards, but it's for Styx, STYX, which is the Hades, right? Obviously coming full circle. Capital Management, which is an incredible name for a fucking hedge fund.
So good.
Just to point out that Kai seemingly has something else going.
Yes. Yeah. Alan has a family. Yeah, we don't. Jancy is a 7th grade geography teacher.
Amazing. I love that so much. And the fact that Alan is an aging quasi radical college professor. I'm who's bald? I'm fuck.
Damn. It's me.
And then the other thing is that we find out only in a text box that Mary Randall won the election.
Yes.
In part thanks to Fierce Blue Fire's endorsement.
Yeah, so that question from the last chapter is resolved.
Yes.
Beautiful. All right, John, what's our call to action?
My proposed episode title that's a call to action. This is more slogan than call to action. And it's something you just pointed us to. Slow ends our world.
Ooh, I love that.
What do you got?
I just did a really blatant play on Foucault here. I'm going to say society must not be defended.
that has to be it.
No, I like slow ends our world. We could combine them.
Yeah, we could combine them. I think that's the way
move.
to go. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Up next, we have an interlude of a hypothetical New York Times op-ed by Al Gore, Bill McKibben, and James Hansen.
It's so funny.
Oh, God. Well, I guess we'll have to talk about storms of my grandchildren.
What a coterie.
And then
of heat and climate.
Followed by the second chapter from Ash's perspective, executive summary on legislative negotiations for the Pollution Reduction Infrastructure and Refund Act of 2029, set in 2029. Wow, we are jumping ahead.
Yeah, sure are. Thank you, listeners, for joining us once again on We Are the Deluge.
And we are, once again, the Deluge.